Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Nur Adam Muhammad Rosli and my magic number is 200440. We are from group 9 and this is our group member. We are going to talk about wastewater treatment regarding the removal of color pigment, fats and oil, organic acid and blood. Then let's start with an introduction. So in general, wastewater from industry will undergo the sequence of wastewater treatment to ensure that the water can be safely used and consumed later on by living organisms. Firstly, industry wastewater undergoes primary treatment to remove large particles as much as possible. It also helps in removing some suspended, fine and colloidal elements by using chemical coagulation and mechanical flocculation method. After that, secondary treatment as stated in the slide are being applied according to the industrial waste that want to be removed. Lastly, tertiary treatments are required to remove remaining hazardous substances. Now we will look into the removal of color pigment in the industrial wastewater. Color is introduced into dyeing material using substances known as dyes and pigment. Dyes are defined as soluble colored substances which mainly apply to textile materials from solution in water. Dye molecules comprise two main components, which are chromophores and isochromes. For pigments, pigments are insoluble compounds integrated by a dispersion process into products such as paints, printing inks, and plastics. Pigment can be classified into two categories, which are homogeneous pigments and mixtures. Based on several studies, the color pigment can be removed effectively by the physical method, physicochemical or chemical method, biological method, combined method, as well as the advanced method. Now we will look into the first technologies in color pigment removals, which is adsorption. Adsorption is the well-known physical method in removal of color pigment. Adsorption is an equilibrium separation process, and there are two types of adsorption process, which are physisorptions and chemisorptions. So the absorption process starts with the transportation of adsorbate from bulk solution to hydrodynamic boundary layer. Then the adsorbate will pass through the layer to the absorbent surface due to molecular diffusion. After that, intra-particle transportation will take place, which is affected by pore diffusion and surface diffusion. Lastly, the adsorbate is attached onto the available active sites on the adsorbent surface. So the popular conventional adsorbent used in the past will be the activated carbon due to its effectiveness in wastewater treatments. However, it required extra cost. Therefore, researchers become interested in finding a cheaper and effective adsorbent, and there are some non-conventional adsorbents that I have listed here, such as bagasse, clay, zeolites, siliceous materials, and biomass, which have been studied for their effectiveness in the removal of methylene blue and Congo red dye. Next, advanced oxidation process, AOP, is also one of the technologies being used in color pigment removal. AOP used intermediacy of hydroxyl and other radicals to oxidize toxic and non-biodegradable compounds to various byproducts. Some AOP processes are eco-friendly nature, complete degradation, low cost, increased water usability, and reduced pollutant load. Firstly, the combined bioadvanced oxidation process. It is the combination technique with bacteria treatment using aromatase hydrophila. It was studied that this method helps degrade Remozel red, reactive red 5, and reactive red 180. This technique also more effective than single wastewater treatment. And second process is the photocatalysis method. So this method used TiO2 as the photocatalyst and required UV radiation to effectively work. It is cheap, non-toxic, chemical stable, environmentally compatible, and commercially available. It helps in degrading organic pollutants and dyes such as propion red MX5B, reactive black 5 dye, and rhodamine B dye. But the absorption level decreased in the visible light. Next is microbial degradation. So the well-known microbial degradation used in the color pigment wastewater removal is fungal biodegradation. This is closely related to the production of extracellular and intracellular enzymes by fungi, which have a degrading capability. For example, Penicillium ochrochlorone produces lignin peroxidase that helps in decolorization of cotton blue dye, and malachite green decolorization mechanism approved by Aspergillus gravis include enzymatic reactions like hydrosylations, demethylation, and ring cleavage. Last but not least, membrane filtration technique is also widely applied in removal of color pigment from industrial wastewater. Membrane filtration allows wastewater to pass through a porous membrane. There are four main classes of pressure-driven membrane procedures. First, the use of ultrafiltration for the recycling and separation of water-insoluble dyes such as dispersed dye and indigo dye. Next, nanofiltration and reverse osmosis procedures are used to hydrolyze reactive dyes from dye wastewater. And for microfiltration, it is generally not used for wastewater treatment due to large pore size. And last, the type of membrane filter will be used for separation will depend on numerous factors like nature of dye, dyeing process, chemical composition of pollutants, and etc. And that's all for me, and I will pass the presentation to the next presenter.
Thank you, Adina. Now I will be explaining about treatment applied in the wastewater treatment plant for the removal of fat, oil, and grease. But first, let us look at the definition of fat, oil, and grease, FOG. Fats, oil, and grease, FOG, are the byproducts of cooking, also called as brown grease. They are a subsection of lipids that are composed of fatty acid, triacylglycerols, and lipid-soluble hydrocarbons. Here are some of the importance of the physical properties of FOG. Firstly, FOG can be solids or viscous liquids depending on the saturation of the carbon chain. In its pure state, FOG is colorless, odorless, and tasteless. It is insoluble in water, but soluble in organic solvents such as hexane, ethers, and chloroform. It is usually produced at food service establishments or other food preparation facilities such as restaurants, residences, and industrial food facilities. The byproduct and waste from this FSE include meat, sauces, gravy, dressing, deep fried food, baked goods, cheese, and butter. Other sources of FOG include discharge from industrial activities, for example, palm oil mill effluent and automobile workshop discharge. Its release into the sewer system results in a continuous build-up that causes eventual blockage of sewer system. Over time, sewer blocked by FOG will fill, leading to the overflow of sewage from manholes. This sewage may eventually make its way to state water sources as a contaminant. As of May 2021, up to 70% of the sanitary sewer overflow that occurs in Malaysia are due to FOG. In May 2021 only, the wastewater municipality in Malaysia, Indah Water Consortium, received a total of 16,000 blockage inquiries. Therefore, several treatments are being applied at the wastewater treatment plant with the aim of eliminating contaminants before the wastewater leave the tanks and enter the ground and being consumed by humans and animals. The first treatment is biological treatment in the form of aerobic treatment. Biological treatments is a type of wastewater treatment designed to degrade pollutants dissolved in effluents by the action of microorganisms. There are two types of biological treatments available, which is the first one is activated sludge and the second one is trickling filter. Activated sludge is a method that uses high concentration of microorganisms, primarily bacteria, protozoa, and fungi, in the form of loose clump mass of small particles retained in suspension by stirring to remove organic materials from wastewater. Meanwhile, trickling filter is a floating fixed bed reactor made of different penetrable pressing metal such as rocks or plastic, which supports aerobic condition by disposal, forced aeration, natural displacement, or splurge. Let us move on to the first treatment, which is the activated sludge. So here is the steps and mechanism of activated sludge at wastewater treatment plant. The diagram shows the mechanism of activated sludge starting from the primary treatment to the secondary treatment. So the first step is primary treatment effluent is pumped into a tank and mixed with a bacteria-rich slurry known as activated sludge. Then, pumping air or poor oxygen through the mixture promotes bacterial growth and organic material decomposition. It is then routed to the secondary settling tank where water is drawn from the tank's top and sludge is removed from the bottom. Some of the sludge is utilized as a primary effluent inoculum, and the remaining sludge, referred to as secondary sludge, is removed. This secondary sludge is combined with primary treatment sludge and anaerobically digested to produce fertilizer. The second treatments that can be used to remove fat, oil, and grease is trickling filters. Here is the mechanism of trickling filter at wastewater treatment plant. Firstly, a population of microorganisms are attached to the medium as a biological film or slime layer to take up organic materials in the wastewater. As the wastewater flows over the medium, microorganisms in the water slowly stick to the rock, slag, or plastic surface and form a film. The organic materials is then digested by aerobic microorganisms in the slime layer's outermost layer. As the layer thickens due to microbial growth, oxygen cannot permeate the medium phase, resulting in the development of anaerobic organisms. And then, the fifth step is that as the biological films grow, surface microorganisms lose their ability to attach to the medium, and slime falls off the filter. This process is known as sloughing. Then, the last step is that the underdrain system picks up the slot solids and sends them to a clarifier, where they are taken out of the wastewater.
Thank you, Sabrina. Now I will explain about two other treatments for fat and oil treatment in wastewater. So the next treatment is adsorption. So to put it simple, adsorption is a physical addition of the polluting chemicals onto the surface of the solid. Some of the material used is activated carbon, bentonite, peat, sand, coal, fiberglass, and so many others. The type of absorbent that commonly used for the absorption treatment is activated carbon because it is technically feasible for the company, but it comes with the great disadvantages, which is the cost for the activated carbon is expensive. So some of the company might also go to the idea of using other type of adsorption which has lower cost. The effectiveness of adsorbent treatment depends on the time taken, initial concentration of adsorbate and absorption isotope. Okay, so next is adsorption mechanism. So in one of the study, it stated it gave an example of coal as the absorption. So coal has double porosity, micro and macro pores, large surface and volume. So it can absorb small oil droplets and emulsify oil. And after the oil was absorbed, it will float. Thus, it will separate the oil from the water. So there are three processes involved in this treatment. The first one is diffusion of oil into the substrate, which is the coal itself. The capillary action of the oil to keep it stick to the coal, and aggregation of oil. So by through this, the treatment of fat and oil using absorption treatment can be done. Okay, so now we will talk about another treatment, the last treatment for fat and oil, which is coagulation. So coagulation is one of the essential part in wastewater treatment. It has chemical and physical coagulation. For the chemical, the one that we usually use in a factory is aluminium and iron coagulant. Coagulant effectiveness can be described as the ability to form multi-charge polynuclear complex. So the nature of the complex usually depends on pH of the substance. and coagulation effectiveness will muchly depends on the mixing, pH, and coagulate dose. For chemical coagulation require at least 3 chemical reagent and pH adjustment, which make it very expensive and labor intensive process. So one of the main drawback for chemical coagulation is it produces large amount of residual sludge at the end of the process. Actually, chemical coagulation is one of the traditional treatment that been introduced to treat fat and oil in wastewater. For the new treatment that was implemented from chemical coagulation is electrocoagulation. Electrocoagulation is wastewater treatment that use electrochemical cell in which it was given direct voltage to sacrificial electrodes. So electrocoagulation does not require external chemical, and it can remove any size of suspended solid, oil and grease plus heavy metal. So in benefit, it also produce only half the amount of chemical, the amount of sludge compared to the chemical coagulation process. So for nowadays, it is normal for the company to start approaching this treatment. So this is a simple explanation of how electrocoagulation happen, and that's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Now I'll talk about the removal of organic acid in the wastewater. The most common and conventional treatment for the organic acid is nanofiltration membrane. The technology of nanofiltration membrane had been used to replace the reverse osmosis (RO). This is due to the lower energy consumption and higher flux rates. The properties of nanofiltration membranes lie between the non-porous RO membrane and also the ultrafiltration membranes. NF allow ions to be separated by a combination of the size and electrical effects of the ultrafiltration and the ion interaction mechanisms of reverse osmosis. And the size of pores of the nanofiltration membranes approximately 1 nanometers, and the small uncharged solutes are highly rejected, while the surface electrostatic properties allow monovalent ions to be reasonably well transmitted with multivalent ions mostly retained. Now I'll talk about the nanofiltration rejection mechanisms. This filtration mechanism has 5. The first mechanism is wetted surface. In these steps, the water associates with the membrane through hydrogen bonding, and the molecules which form the hydrogen bonding with the membrane can be transported. Second step is preferential sorption or capillary rejection. In this step, the membrane is heterogeneous and microporous, and the electrostatic repulsion occurs due to different electrostatic constants of solution and membrane. Next is the charge capillary. In this step, the mechanism is the electric double layer in the pores determines rejection. Ions of the same charge as that of the membrane are attracted, and counter ions are rejected due to the streaming potential. Next is solution diffusion. In this step, the membrane is homogeneous and non-porous, and solute and solvent dissolve in the active layer of the membrane, and the transport of the solvent occurs due to the diffusion through the layer. Finally, the last mechanism is finely porous. In this step, membrane is a dense material punctured by pores. The transport is determined by partitioning between bulk and pore fluid. So that's all from me. Now I'll pass to the next presenter.
Hello there. So now Najiha and I will explain on how we are going to remove blood from wastewater. So where do we find this blood? Usually in slaughterhouse, the wastewater from the slaughterhouse, from the poultry slaughterhouse, usually they will have lots of blood from the animal itself. So basically we're going to remove this blood because blood is basically a waste. And on how how we're going to treat blood in wastewater is we're going to explain in terms of two methods, which is ultrafiltration method and as well as anaerobic treatment. So now let's go. Now first, I will explain about ultrafiltration method. So before we going into the part on how ultrafiltration method can treat blood, can remove blood from wastewater, let's take a look on what is ultrafiltration method. So basically, ultrafiltration method is part of the membrane filtration process, whereby it will filter out I would say compounds, the particles, the waste of according to each of the size. So in ultrafiltration method, it can retain particles only of the size of 5 to 100 nanometer only. And also so some of the examples of the particles that can be retained in ultrafiltration is proteins and also salts. And as you can see the diagram beside, you can see that in the range of ultrafiltration, the even red blood cells, basically from the blood, cannot pass through the ultrafiltration. So you must be wondering how and why the red blood cell cannot go through ultrafiltration method for the ultrafiltration stage. So let's take a look at the next slide. So for your information, red blood cell size is around 10,000 nanometer across. So basically, it is too big to go through to pass through ultrafiltration stage. So that is why we can use ultrafiltration method to separate blood from the wastewater, because blood is too big for the ultrafiltration. With that kind of size of around 10,000 nanometer, it can only retain in microfiltration. Because microfiltration is just the stage is just before ultrafiltration. So that is why we use ultrafiltration to retain the red blood cell from going through the membrane filtration method. So ultrafiltration will prevent red blood cell from going through. So the existence of blood, it may cause high BOD level in wastewater, and ultrafiltration can be very effective to remove red blood cells from the wastewater because of the size itself. So a study by Yordanov in 2010, he found that BOD level in the wastewater of a poultry slaughterhouse has been reduced significantly after ultrafiltration treatment. So this literally indicates that it is very effective to remove blood through ultrafiltration method, because red blood cells, the size of the red blood cells cannot go through the size of the ultrafiltration stage. So that is why we can remove blood from the from the wastewater by using the ultrafiltration method. So I think that's all for ultrafiltration method. So now let's get on to anaerobic treatment that will be explained by my friend Najiha.
Thank you, Azim. So for the next treatment is anaerobic treatment. So this is a biological process where the microorganism will degrade the organic compounds found in wastewater in the absence of oxygen. So this treatment usually found in the slaughterhouse wastewater management. So the result of this treatment, the effluent discharge will resulting in the low BOD, COD, and TSS, which is total suspended solid, as well as biogas byproduct. So this is some of the facts from the several studies show that the processing wastewater containing blood actually has approximately 4 times of BOD compared to the processing water without blood. And the second one is about this a cow. A single cow carcass blood is actually have equivalent to a total sewage produced by 50 people on average day. And at the slaughterhouse waste, 7 to 11% is actually comes from the blood of animals. So this is the layout of the slaughterhouse wastewater management for meat processing plant. So after the screening process, the organic compounds such as oil, grease, and blood will flow into the sedimentation tank and will be treated with anaerobic treatment. So the anaerobic treatment here, the method used is by using anaerobic digestion. So after this treatment, further process is required to ensure the purity of the wastewater treatment. Now let's take a look at the anaerobic wastewater process. So there was two stages that were involved in this process, which are acidification and methane production stages. So for the first stage, the anaerobes will break down the complex organic compounds into organic acid. So the increased amount of the organic acid in the wastewater will resulting in the lower pH, thus the wastewater will become acidic. For the next stages is methane production. It consists of two steps, which is acetogenesis and methanogenesis. So acetogenesis is the organic compounds that were synthesized by anaerobes and produce acetate, hydrogen gas, and carbon dioxide. And as for methanogenesis, the product from the acetogenesis will be synthesized by anaerobes and will produce methane gas, and carbon dioxide. Here comes for the last part, which is anaerobic wastewater treatment system. So there are three types of system that were commonly found in the slaughterhouse wastewater management, which are anaerobic lagoons, anaerobic sludge blanket reactors, and lastly, anaerobic filter reactors. So for the first one is anaerobic lagoons. So this is where the wastewater will be piped into the bottom of lagoon to form an upper liquid layer on top of the sludge. Actually, this to create the free oxygen environment, which is prevent the oxygen from reacting to the sludge for the anaerobic digestion process to occur. So for the next one is anaerobic sludge blanket. So the wastewater actually will pass through the sludge blanket that were floating, and at the same time, the anaerobes in the sludge will digest the organic constituent in the wastewater to degrade or break down the organic compounds into smaller particles. So for the last one is anaerobic filter reactors. So the anaerobes that we use in this system will be grow on the filter media, which is known as biofilm. So the wastewater stream that pass through the filter media, actually they were being exposed to the biofilm, and the organic compound will be captured and digested as well as degraded. So after some time, the filter media will eventually become clogged with excess biofilm and need to be maintained by cleaning to ensure the optimal performance of the system. So I think that's all.
In conclusion, the removal of color pigment includes absorption, advanced oxidation process, microbial degradation, and membrane filtration. Then, the removal of fat, oil, and grease involve treatments such as activated sludge, trickling, filter, adsorption, and coagulation. Next, the removal of organic acid involve nanofiltration membrane. And lastly, the removal of blood involves ultrafiltration and aerobic treatment. Thank you for listening. Here are our references.